Having a wonderful Friday. You just hit refresh. Okay, let's see. Okay, I see that we are live on my end, and I'm so excited to paint with you all today on this fall Friday. I thought since it's almost October, which is crazy to think that it's almost October, that we could paint a calendar and a lot of fun fall illustrations. I've seen some really fun fall bucket lists, so I thought that could also be used for this and just kind of check off different things that you do in October. Some of the fall favorites, there are so many fall favorites that I couldn't even fit them all on this watercolor calendar page. So, but this is what I have for us today to paint together. And there's actually a free printable that you can download and print or trace whatever you have the capabilities to do at home. You could even print out part of this, the calendar on one sheet, and then print out the illustrations on its own sheet and kind of split it up and cut it out. And then you could always kind of like scrapbook it together. I plan to put mine in a frame. As you can see, I don't have the dates listed on this calendar printable because that way you can use it for future years to come if you wanted to do that. So once it's done, just go ahead and write in the dates. But yeah, I plan to put mine in a frame, and then I can use like a dry erase marker to write on my calendar. Or if you don't even want to do a calendar, just go ahead and follow along with our fun fall illustrations today. It's a great beginner tutorial. It's basic, more light and airy, simple illustrations. So that is what we are going to be doing today. I know today is kind of a spontaneous scheduling of this live, so when I have a baby, I kind of just have to be able to paint when I can. So thanks for bearing with me, but the recording will be here on my YouTube channel under the live category section on my channel. So very, very excited. Right now, I'm just going to switch this one out and grab some of my supplies. So I also am going to be using probably mostly just like one brush out of this, to be honest. This is an etcher brush size 3, so I'm able to get kind of a thicker stroke and a nice pointed edge to it, so details, which is great, super versatile. I'm always a pointed round brush favorite. This is my type of favorite brush to use. You could use something a little bit bigger, but as long as you have something that has a nice pointed tip to it, that is going to be very, very helpful. And of course, your water, paper towel. I'm using this Winsor & Newton Cotman travel set. I like to teach my tutorials with them because it's a pretty typical basic set. So if you are brand new to watercolor, you likely have a lot of these same colors. I see that I have already dripped some water on my calendar, so let's just mop that up. But yeah, so important to have your paper towel. And the one color that this set doesn't have that I rely on is this Payne's Gray color. So I'm going to actually just put some right on my palette in the mixing well so I can use it. I should almost add it. I have a little blank spot there. You can actually buy these little white wells that I should just add that in there. So I always have it. I hope you guys are having a great fall season so far. It's starting to really feel fall-like over here in Wisconsin. The colors are changing and the leaves are falling. I'm happy, but also maybe a little sad about it. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's just, I love fall, but I also don't love what comes after fall, which is winter. But I know that's all in our attitude. So there's a lot of fun things that we can do for winter around here, and I just need to embrace that. But for right now, let's focus on fall. I'm going to get started with, I think I'll work with this brush actually. This is just a really affordable set. It's by Transin. I got them off of Amazon and I really, really enjoy them a lot. So size 4. Always note though that sizes of brushes across different brands are not created equal. So let's get our palette wet paints, wet and activated. So I will go ahead and get my browns going. We'll be using a mix of brown for our boot, our hiking boot, and we'll also be using some of the burnt sienna color to give it a little bit of a warmer hue, and the yellow ochre. I'm with you about fall. I'm in Wisconsin too. Oh yeah, so I think I think a lot of us northern Midwestern folks are kind of like we love fall because truly it's such a beautiful season. The only problem is it's too short. Um, yeah, I haven't met too many big winter fans, to be honest. So let's grab some of this brown. I'm actually just going to pull a little bit of the orange. Kind of want to warm up my boot a little bit. So the brown, kind of a medium amount on my brush with kind of the same ratio water to paint. And this is where we're just going to start to fill in the boot. And it doesn't need to be like stressful or anything. We're just going to fill this in and then we'll use a little bit of a wet on wet technique to drop in color. And that way we can add a little dimension. And then after things dry, we can even add more dimension. But again, I want to keep these light and not super detailed. And you kind of want to move fairly quickly, but I'm using 140-pound cold pressed paper. That's always my go-to paper. And I have time to work with it. It's not like it's going to dry, especially on a small illustration, that quickly. All right. I might zoom us in maybe a little bit so you guys can see. There we go. So now I have the boot. It is all wet, and I'm going to grab some of that brown color, so just that brown, and this is where I'm going to just drop it in around the outer edge of the boot while it is still wet. So again, I'll just kind of run it around the edges of the boot. Might grab a little more water because I want it to kind of smooth and bloom around like that. Maybe add some up top. I always forget there's this little section I created right here. We'll just fill that in. Another handy tip is to get rid of the paint on your brush. Let's say you had too much paint, you can always bring in your brush that doesn't have a whole lot of water to it and mop up water and paint if you have too much. And that's a good way to lighten an area if you need to. I think I want to add in just a little more dynamic of a color scheme to this. So let's grab a little more of our burnt sienna and orange mixture and just kind of drop it in places and just let that. So let's say this is a leather boot, brown leather boot, and so it needs a little bit more variety in the leather color. And again, I'll just take my brush and help move that around like that. So the tricky part now is to make sure that I don't let the dark sole of this boot blend into the wet area that I was just painting. So I will be very careful to grab some more of that just true brown color here. And that's what I'll use to fill in this section. It might actually need a little bit more of a dark color, so this is where you could add a little hint of black or the Payne's Gray to help darken it. I'll just grab a little bit of black. I usually don't use black, but for this, just to kind of give it a nice muted color, I will use the black. All right, so being careful, this is where that nice pointed tip with our brush comes in. I'm actually not going to paint as close to the edge on this boot, so I don't let it run into the wet area of the boot. Again, you could wait, but I'm going to finish painting in the sole, just like this. And using really light pressure, I'm able to get in those little detailed areas. I'm working on 11 by 14 size right now, so that makes my illustrations a little bit bigger. And my printer does print on this size, which is super handy. I can drop a link after the video once the recording posts. I can drop in the link to the printer that I have. It's the Canon IP8720. So now I need to put a little more black. I need something even darker in this little block right underneath here. That is where the shadow is right there. So you can kind of see that shadow there. And now I'll even grab a little bit more of that dark color I was just working with and just kind of drop it in along the bottom half here of the boot. Okay, so the sole, or not the sole, the tongue of our boot is also going to be that rich dark brown, kind of like we just did with the sole of the boot. So let's go ahead and fill in that, working around those laces really carefully. It's kind of just a fun, relaxing, almost like a coloring page for watercolor. So again, I'm just filling in those pieces, not worrying too much about super details, just enough to fill in the tongue there. Let's see, I think I'm even going to zoom in farther for you guys. I don't know how much closer I can get, and I want to make sure I can see my palette. So let's do that. I'll scoot things over for you. So again, I'm going to use that same color for up here on the upper heel or ankle area. And we'll paint that piece in. And now this back piece needs to be darker. So let's grab some more black and mix it with our browns. And because this part is shadowed, or has the shadow back there, and there's this little loop right there. So it's hard to see detail in this right now. I'm just going to get rid of the paint on my brush. And I think I'm just going to scoop up some of that right up front here. All right. I'm going to switch to a smaller brush because of these laces. So if you have a smaller brush, or if you're doing great with your larger brush with a nice point to it, then you can continue on. I'm going to activate the red color here in my palette. I gotta use quite a lot of water to get this paint going again. I'm going to add a little bit of orange just to really make it more of a crimson color. Nice rich red. All right. So let's be careful. I think I'll start at the bottom here. And again, I am just going to paint in those skinny laces. It's hard to see some of these little lines here. Let's see. I think in the future too, it'd be fun to create little like stickers or do something with the illustrations. And so all I would need to do is scan in these illustrations once I'm done with them. and I can create other fun products, which is what I call digitizing artwork. So I actually have a class too, and maybe you guys have seen it if you've been around. I just released it this year, digitizing watercolor secrets, and it'll teach you how to scan in your artwork and take it and put it onto other types of products. Okay, looking good there. There's that. For the buckles, I think that I will just use the brown again. So maybe a mix of the burnt sienna and the dark brown that we just had. Just something that's going to um, make sure it stands out against the leather of the boot, but also staying within our color scheme, like that. And I'll just add that little piece on the tongue. Okay, so our boot, it looks pretty basic right now. What we can do, if yours got a little flat like mine, so I want to add a little more richness and color to it, I might grab a little bit of that yellow ochre and mix it with some of our browns. And now I'm just going to run my brush kind of right along again that area that I had painted before. Just add in a little more texture and dimension. Now with a little bit of water on my brush, I can help smooth some of that around. But even that helped a ton. And now you can see that I left a little bit of a sketch line here, and that we will use a darker color just to create the seams of the boot, and that'll really help it come together. I want to add a little more detail to the part of the heel here. So I'll grab a little more of that dark brown. I need to darken. So now that that is dried, it'll just layer right over top of that. And I'll also paint that little loop. And then as well as painting the little line in the fabric. And down below here. And next, let's just add this little line. If your boot, only do this if your boot is dry. So mine is fairly dry right now. I think, hopefully I'm right. I don't want to make it super stark and dark, so just something light. Just a little bit of a darker color than the boot actually is. So there it is right there. And this part might be too wet. Yeah, it's a little too wet yet for me, so I will come back to this line right here. But here we have our fun, loose illustration of a boot. Again, we can come back and add in more colors if we need to. So let's work our way down, and then we'll work our way up like that. Actually, I'll leave the boot there so you can continue to see it as we paint our latte. All right, so here's the latte that I painted for the practice run. And I'll do something very similar. It has more of the Payne's Gray in the whipped foam up top here. So that is what I love to use on white objects. Let's go ahead and start with that. So again, I'm using Payne's Gray. Let me see if I can pull that up here. But I need the slightest amount. So I really am using just water and barely brushing that color into my brush here. And you'll see why, because it will stand out quite a bit. And I'm going to just continue to add a little bit on these little ridge lines to show. Kind of hard to see when it's reflecting, but as you can see when I move my paper like this, we are just adding it into those little ridge lines to show shadows in our whipped cream here. So I don't have a lot. I might even grab just a little bit more to show some even greater shadows that can just be dropped right in where we just were painting. Like that. And now I will let that dry because I'll go back through and add some sprinkle of cinnamon on top. Down below here then is going to have a lot of the same color scheme of our boot, maybe a little more of the yellow ochre. So I'll come back up here. Going to start mixing the yellow ochre with some of our brown colors here. Just want a really light yellowish gold color for our coffee latte. And now the fun part is that you don't need to worry. You can just go ahead and fill in your coffee down below here, and we are going to drop colors into it to make it look a little more swirly and more lifelike, but still, of course, loose. I just grabbed a little more water just to carry along that color that's already on my brush. All right, so there I have my base color, and you can kind of see that it's fairly wet, but not soupy. So now what we'll do is grab some of the warm colors. So that burnt sienna color right there, you can mix it with a little bit of the brown just to make it not quite so orange. But now the fun part of dropping it in. So I'll just throw some down there, kind of throw some up top here and down below. Try and keep this part light. So that's one of the colors I dropped in. And now I want to add in some darker browns. So I'll just grab that brown again from my palette. And again, like I just did, I'll just drop it in around the outer edge. And then once this dries, it's going to have a really pretty watercolor effect to it because we're doing that blooming, which is what watercolor is most known for. All right. So there's that. Now we can even kind of scoop some paint up if we needed to. The other tip that I do like to do is to drop in a little bit of that same Payne's Gray blue because it brings in a little reflection from the glass it's sitting in. So let's let that drop in and have a little effect. So it's super light. I don't know if you can see that very well, but super light, just enough to be able to see that it's a glass. Let's do our cinnamon sticks and then we'll finish off the rest of the glass up here. So our cinnamon sticks are going to be that nice orangey brown, burnt brown color. So let's grab our burnt sienna and mix it with a little bit of yellow and the brown. So that's going to be more of our base. Let's just paint in those cinnamon sticks. I'll just grab a little more water. All right, so just like that. So now they are kind of a flat color. I'm actually just going to grab a little more yellow just to help drop in a little more dynamic feel so it's not super flat there, but we will add in some other color. And once this dries, we'll be able to add in the darker details. Maybe just drop in a little bit of the burnt sienna. I don't need quite that much. Let me just go back through and scoop some of it up and move it around there. All right, so while I have some of that on my brush, that same brown and burnt sienna color. This is where we'll use the very tip of our brush to kind of add a little more of that sprinkle detail up top. So let's say some cinnamon was just sprinkled right on top of our foam. We'll just do a little speckles here and there. All right. So again, like I mentioned, we are going to finish out the mug as well as add in a little more detail. So the mugs that if they're white or they're glass, the Payne's Gray works really great for that. So let's grab a little bit of that Payne's Gray and run it right along the edges of this handle there. Just going to get rid of some of that on my brush and smooth it down. And now another place is down here, so we'll add some right along the edges of those sketch lines, like that. And I also like to bring it back into our foam up top, just to help emphasize some of those shadowed areas and along the opening of the mug. And the other thing that we need to do is still add in a little more detail into our cinnamon and also bring in a little bit of that brown color to reflect into our mug handle. So very little on my brush. I'll just kind of swipe that down and around on my mug handle here and down below over that same blue color we just painted. And some on our foam right there because the coffee is kind of seeping into the foam. All right, keeping some white space on the paper for the reflections. Let's paint in the detail of our cinnamon sticks just to make them really look like they are cinnamon sticks. So I don't need a whole lot of water, but I am going to grab some of that brown and mix a little bit of black into it just to darken it. And this is what we'll use to run right along the center because the cinnamon stick has that little detail down the center. And then those little cute curly pieces at the end there. We'll do the same for this one. So simple. And maybe I'll just run it a little bit right here just to show the overlap shadow. All right. There is our latte. Let's see, let's do our fall leaves next. I want to make sure that you can still see the latte in case you want to catch up on that one. So I'll probably do a variation of the burnt orange leaf, kind of a more yellow leaf, and then the bright red leaf. So let's start at the bottom. That burnt orange is going to be similar to what we were just painting. So I want to keep it somewhat lighter first because we are going to drop in some darker browns into it. So I mix the burnt sienna and the yellow ochre. And let's just fill in that leaf. So here's my base color that I'm using. Just fill that in. Let's see, kind of work our way over here. Being careful to show the little sharp edges of our maple leaf. All right. And then once I'm done with this. I might scoop some of that color out again with my brush so it's not super flat, and then we'll drop in the darker browns. All right. So there's that leaf. And now what I'm going to do is take my brush, I kind of dried it off with my paper towel, and I'll just scoop some of that up along the center there, and you can already start to see a little variation happening. But then while it's still wet, I'll grab just that brown, and let's just drop some of that in right along the edges. You might even want to drop in a little bit of red. Leaves are a lot of fun because they have so many different colors, and that blooming effect of wet on wet really is a great way to paint fall leaves. All right, there's our first leaf. We'll do the stem at the end. Let's do our next leaf as more of that yellow golden color. So here I have my yellow ochre. Just gonna grab that and fill that leaf in. Just like this, and then I might even drop a little bit of a brighter yellow into it. All right, so I have more of a canary yellow in my palette here, and I'll just drop some of that in just to help brighten. And that's probably all I'll do for that yellow leaf. And now for this one, I want to make the base of it mostly the red. So those red leaves I think are one of the more fan favorites of fall leaves. So we'll make a nice bright red one and drop in some browns into it. So here I have my red. Those may be a little too much paint, so I'll get rid of that. And then this one is a little trickier, it's a little smaller. All right, so there we have our filled in red leaf. And I'm going to actually scoop some of that paint up. And then I'll grab some of the brown. And I'm just going to drop that in because it's going to color mix right on the page then and create kind of a darker red with that brown. So it's hard to see because of the reflection of the light there, but here I'll pick it up. So you can still see pieces of red and then the mix of the brown. So while those dry, I will grab, I think I'll use my other skinnier brush to do the details of our stems here. So I'll just grab a little bit of the brown. And because this leaf is dry, I'll just run it right over top. And then also over the veins of the leaves here. And that is going to really help it look a little more lifelike. All right, so there's that one. Now for this yellow leaf one, I'm just going to use a little bit of a darker yellow. So that was the yellow mixed with a little bit of brown because it's going to layer over nicely. It might actually still be a little too wet, so I have to wait that one out. If you're like me, we'll just come back to that at the end. We will move on to our apple picking basket. So let's fill in the basket with a nice light tan. So it's just kind of that wicker light kind of wood color. So here I have my browns mixed with my yellow ochre and not a whole lot of paint. And I'm just going to fill in that basket. Like this, and then we will add dimension to it and then add some more once it dries. It's kind of nice that we can use a lot of the same colors throughout the illustration, so then you don't have to always be color mixing new colors. You can kind of use what you have already in your paint wells mixed up here on your palette. Okay, so there I have the brown basket, and I'm just going to grab a little bit of the darker brown, and I am going to just drop it down, kind of like we did with our latte, and kind of hit it around the edges here as well as underneath where that band is. It just kind of creates a nice little shadow area, even though it's going to fade. It's just a nice blending technique. And we'll add in the details once that dries. And while we wait for that to dry, let's start to paint in our apples. Of course, they are going to be more in the reds. So I'll just grab some of that red color onto my palette. And let's just start to paint the apples, but I'm going to leave part of the tops not filled in because I will drop in maybe some yellow and greens. And that's a good way to do it. So you want to kind of leave space for that. A lot of apples will sometimes have those two-toned colors of yellows and greens. And it just creates a nice, fun little apple illustration instead of one flat red. So again, I'm just kind of painting and leaving the tops open for right now. This one might just be all red in there. Maybe I'll add a little bit of dark color in there too, as well as like apples have the shinier skin to them, so that's always a great way is to leave a little white of the paper. And that'll show the shine as well. All right, so I'm just kind of going around like this. So super loose. And now I'll get rid of that red on my paintbrush. And let's pick up a little bit of yellows and greens. So how about some yellow ochre? And then I also have this sap green in my palette. And I love to mix that green with yellow, the yellow ochre, just to kind of create more of a more of a sap green, brighter color. So here we have our yellows and our greens, and we'll just let that, it's okay if it plays and mixes with the red. So I'm just filling in some of those areas. And it is blending with my red, and that is perfectly great. So they look kind of messy, but that's okay, that's fun. And let's get rid of the paint on our brush, and let's start to just pick up some of that red and help blend in some of the green areas. So I'm just taking it and smoothing the two colors together where they start to meet. All right. And if you need to, we can bring some of that color down. Some of my areas got a little too white in there. So now what we need to do is add in darker reds to our apple. And what we'll do to get that is the red mixed with just the brown, that chocolatey brown that we have in our palette. And then I'll just drop that in anywhere the apple, kind of like the lower half or where apples are kind of touching together. So where it's being overlapped by the basket down here, it's going to get that nice dark color. Or up here where that apple is touching the other apple. So that's going to really help make them look more lifelike. Can even do some speckling in there. All right, some fun loose apples in the basket. Now we just need to add the little green leaves to them. So same with that green that I was using, the sap green. I'm just going to add a little bit of that yellow ochre to it. And maybe a little bit of the Payne's Gray. And that creates more of that neutral green color. And that's what I'll use with the very tip of my brush on these green leaves. Being careful not to touch anything that's wet. If you need to, you can always rotate your painting around. So while that's still wet, let's pick up some of our brighter greens and drop them into our leaves. They're so tiny that you're not really going to get a whole lot of detail. So something like that is great. So now, since this is drying, the basket is, I'll grab a little bit of a smaller brush. So I have my size 3. And all I need to do is grab some of that brown. Kind of running out of room for my palette here. So any type of brown, even if it has some of that burnt color to it, I don't need a whole lot, but something to help paint along the lower edge of our sketch lines here. That's going to show the basket lines. So there, and then these are the woven little pieces. If you've seen a little apple basket, they have those little vertical pieces that are darker. So something like that. And then here's another band. So I got to do another little dark line to show the shadow right there and above. So that made a huge difference. If you feel like you need more dimension, you totally can grab your brown and add a little bit more down below and on the side. Maybe even up top here. But I think that looks pretty good. The other thing that I want to do is add detail into our apples. And for me, I'm just going to use that brown again. I'm going to grab quite a bit of paint on my brush. And I just want to paint the stem on my apples. So in the very tip of my brush, it's almost like we're drawing them on. Something like that. And we can add that stem from our leaf here as well. So this is going to dry lighter. It looks kind of dark right now, but everything's going to dry lighter than the paint appears. Let's actually finish our leaves while we're still here. I'm just going to grab some of that yellow, like I mentioned, and that's going to be the little vein lines. So I'll just use the tip of my brush, paint those on, and then I need to paint my red ones. All I'll do is grab that red and brown mixture, and it's going to layer right over top really nicely. Perfect. Okay. So there we have our nature hike, spiced lattes, fall leaves, and apple picking are done. We have 2 more to go, which is our fall sweater and pumpkin. So now it's getting a little bit trickier. Let me scoot this on to see our palette. Okay, so the fall sweater for me is going to be a green sweater. So just like we did with our other illustrations, we'll fill this all in with a green color. So again, I want kind of more of an earthy green this time than this, oops, bright green. So here's my sap green, and I'll mix some of that Payne's gray into it. And that'll give us more of that earthy, olivey green. So let's paint or fill in our sweater here. And then we'll paint in a little more detail once that dries. So it's kind of like that cowl neck, cozy fall sweater. Oops, mine had a little yellow to it, but that's okay. Just get rid of that. So again, I'm just working it down, trying to hurry before it all dries. Don't worry if you don't mix enough color. It's okay if you are now painting with a color that has a little more yellow to it. It's all just going to blend nicely together. And this is our first little base layer, so that's okay. And we'll drop in some other colors like we did on the other ones. So I'll just finish painting that in. Here's the arm here. All right. So you can already see that it's starting to kind of do that fun blooming effect. And all I'm going to do is start to add in a little dimension. So I'll grab the Payne's gray and mix it with our green again. This is going to be more of the shadowed area where like the outer edges of the sweater kind of overlap. So as well as like the arm here. And then I'll do some on this arm. So as you can see, this one's blooming way more because we painted it last, so it's still wetter than this arm was, which is totally fine. And then I'll add a little more dimension into the cowl neck up top there, down on the ridge here, and the arm. It's almost like too much, but maybe I'll just leave it. Since it's not blooming a whole lot there, I think that's okay. Just add a little more over here. If you don't like what's happened here, you can just use your clean brush and smooth it out. All right, so we need to let our sweater dry and we will come back and add the cable details and like the little pockets and the little drawstrings up top. So let's paint our little pumpkin here while we wait for that to dry. Going to be a traditional pumpkin. And again, I don't have a whole lot of room here, but I'm just going to kind of move out some of this paint, so I'll just scoop it out. I'll probably use some of these same colors that I've been using up here in the browns, but right now I just want to work more in the oranges. So here I have a true orange, and I want to make it not quite so orange. I want to make it more of like a kind of a tangerine color. I'll just add the yellow ochre to it. And I'll fill in my pumpkin. I'm going to actually grab more yellow and more water to kind of blend that around. So again, the pumpkin, similar to the apple, is going to be more of a shiny outer skin. So I do want some areas that are going to be lighter in color just to show the shine. All right, so I have my full pumpkin painted in. I'm actually going to take my brush and scoop some of that paint up over here in the side and up top. Because we will go through and add dimension into those ridge lines. So here's just that base layer that I created for our pumpkin. So like I said, it's going to bloom in there, so we want to create a little more of a darker orange. Let's just grab the true orange and a little bit of our burnt sienna color. I don't want a whole lot on my brush, so I kind of dabbed my paper towel. Let's start at the bottom where it's going to be the darkest. Maybe I didn't have enough, so just going to drop in some of that darker orange color and kind of paint along those lines, even though it won't stay, but it's creating kind of that nice shadowed area on the bottom, as well as I want to run some right up top here where the pumpkin is kind of coming into itself on the stem. All right, so I need to wait for that to, oops, I got a little too crazy there. There. So I need to wait for our pumpkin to dry a little more, but I love what's happening already with the blooming effect on the orange. So let's get rid of that color on our brush and we can work back up into our sweater because that for me is much more dry and ready to add detail to it. So I'm going to switch to that smaller detailed brush that I have, and I'm going to grab Payne's Gray and mix it with the green. I don't want a super dark color because once it layers, it's going to actually get darker anyways with watercolor. So let's go ahead and paint in those cute little pockets we have here. I'm just going to outline them, as well as outlining the darkest areas. So right along here, where the arm meets the body of the sweater, and along the arm and the cuff. And let's do that over here as well. And this little torso area and our cuff on the sleeve. So if we want to, we can even blend that a little bit more. Just take kind of a drier, cleaner brush and smooth it along. Up top here. So we definitely need to, if yours is like mine, darken this part. That's where the neckline is. And then I can show that cowl neck there, like that. And then these are drawstrings. So I want to make sure I have some good detail just to show those little drawstrings. And then also just a little bit of a fold that kind of goes like that on the neck. All right, so there's our green sweater. So here I have my pumpkin. I think it's getting dry enough to paint. So this paper dries really quickly, or dries enough to be able to create the detail in the pumpkin. So I'm going to use my detailed brush again, kind of mix up that orange and that brown together in my palette. And now we'll just go through, oops, and kind of follow along those lines like this and up top. So mine definitely was dry because it's not blending on its own anymore. So we'll just add some up there, like that. And I'm actually going to help blend it. So I just grabbed a little bit of water and I'm going to run some of that down so I don't see such a dark color and stark line, even though there are kind of going to be some deeper creases in there. So we'll do that. And maybe a little burnt sienna to add more to the bottom where the shadow is and up top. All right, let's get rid of all that orange on our brush and come on back to our green colors, similar to how we painted the apple leaves. So here I have my sap green and a little bit of yellow. This is kind of a brighter color, but let's just see how that looks. All right, so there I have that. And just to add a little bit more dimension to our stem, let's grab some of that Payne's Gray to make it a darker green. And we'll just drop it in right where the pumpkin and the stem meet, right there. And I'll take my dry brush and scoop up some of that paint up top here. And if you have some that runs into your pumpkin, I think that is just going to be a nice fun effect with watercolor. So don't worry, because my stem is starting to bleed into the pumpkin as well. Okay, you guys, here we have our calendar page with our boot, our leaves, our latte, apples, sweater, and pumpkins. Again, there are so many other fall favorites that I felt like I could have included in this calendar page, but I knew that for the space and the time, I had to choose. So I hope you guys are able to do some of these fun fall activities where you're at this fall. And here we have our October calendar page. I'll probably do this for each of the months going forward, and I'll also share maybe some future tutorials on what you can do with these illustrations in addition to just painting on our calendar page. All right, you guys, thank you so much for joining me today, and I can't wait to see you all in the next paint along video.